Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back in to start talking about Mythic Ny'alotha and how good some of these fights really are as we start stepping into Mythic PTR testing. So what's good, what's bad about the first three bosses that we've tested thus far? Starting off, we've got Ratheon. So, Ratheon is, of course, in this corrupted state, or this illusion state, as we fight the boss, and some notable events for heroic and normal difficulties. You have to deal with the incineration going out. You're going to be having those three targets that are going to be detonating after a short period of time, so they got to be able to run away from players, as well as the Gale Blast, which you must be running away from before he pounds the ground and deals a bunch of damage to the group. As usual, Tail Swipe because it's a dragon, and you're going to have the tank frontals because, again, it's dragon. But the most significant thing on Mythic difficulty is that you're going to be getting stacks of Creeping Madness. Now, every time that you move, and you can kind of like stutter step very briefly, but anytime that you move, you're going to start gaining stacks, preventing you from moving as quickly. At 50 stacks, you start taking a bunch of damage every single time that you move. So you still can move, you're still very slow, you just take very, very heavy hits in the process, making Gale Blast and Incineration a little bit more challenging because you naturally have to build up stacks of this slow. Thankfully, they're not going to be too much of a bother, as they believe they did end up falling off for us during the intermission, or we could just stand still in the middle of the room and drop them very easily once we did so. During the intermission, you still do have to pick up those Scales of Wrathion and have a couple players start running through any of the pillars that are going off, and you still have those assassins that are out there that you need to be able to round up quickly and kill, just like we saw out of heroic difficulty on that one. So from this perspective, first boss is pretty good thus far. There's some predictable damage going out. There's no like very annoying time gates like you saw out of, for example, like Hellfire Citadel's first boss, for example, where you have to kill wave after wave of enemies out of mobs. Pretty straightforward, although there are some annoyances when you have to deal with the boss running into different corners of the room in order to breathe an AE down the group, and you have to run away from it. There are a lot of those constraints that just start taking a lot more time to kill than other general bosses that you'd see. So the other side of it is that there's going to be multiple areas, whereas Disc or Paladin, you're not going to be able to hit the boss in order to generate more healing. But oh no, it's not like Disc and Paladin really need any better fights as is, right guys? So no big deal on that one, a pretty simple and a straightforward first boss. Our third boss on the list right now is Prophet Skitra. And in this encounter, much like we saw out of Heroic, you do still have to deal with some of the adds that are going to be dealing a massive burst from Shred's Psyche. And it will be dealing that heavy drop-off damage. So players need to make sure that they get out of the way of those adds, stay far away until they do their first detonate, and then they need to jump on them and kill them very quickly. Now previously, we'd only seen different debuffs on the raid during the intermission, which caused players to see only some of the illusion adds that would come out. Now on Mythic, everybody has that debuff from the very beginning of the encounter, meaning that players with debuff A will only see certain mobs, whereas players with debuff B will only see others. This makes it very difficult to class stack, or maybe it just even further encourages class stacking to better your odds, so that when any of the illusions spawn and they start charging towards the raid, you're more easily able to root them because you have a higher chance, or higher amount of druids basically. Mass root everything before it gets to your stacked up party, because only half your raid will be able to see these ads coming. Once again, in the intermission phase, you do have to stay on top of which ads are real and which are fake to determine which one that your entire raid kills. And this is going to be a very heavy amount of damage onto the group, as all of the images are cracking down on everybody pretty much at the exact same time. So focusing as best as you possibly can on making sure the communication basically between your tanks is as strong as possible, and your tanks are able to call where any of the illusions are coming from, and hopefully you've got enough classes to help you knock back, stun, slow, or hopefully just root any of those charging illusions, so that way you don't have to deal with them whatsoever. This fight has a ton of damage going out onto it, and since there's not a great amount of movement that's going to be required, it's going to be a lot more of just a turret fight from a healing perspective, and making sure that you're rotating cooldowns as best as you possibly can to make sure that you're not only sustaining the heavy damage coming from the adds as they first spawn, but also to deal with any of the illusions that spawn during the intermission. And you can kind of think of Vectis from this point. Yeah, you have to run around a little bit. There's going to be communication as to what you need to hit and what you need to focus on. But in general, a lot of your focus as a healer is going to be on keeping everybody alive and cycling cooldowns to make sure nobody's dropping too terribly low, because all of those illusions are bombarding you all at the same time. The fourth boss in the raid is Dark Inquisitor Xanesh. And this is, of course, our soccer boss, or football if you're EU. This is going to be the boss that will spawn those void orbs that you need to knock into the void portal in order to make sure that you are just able to get it out of your sight and not have to deal with it whatsoever. So, 3 players to the left and right and back of the boss. 3 circles will spawn, players stand in them, and then they are going to be getting the Void Woken debuff. While they have this debuff on them, they deal 99% less damage, and it allows them to interact with the Void Orb. They'll see a big cone above their head, showing the direction in which the Void Orb will go. Now, directing the Void Orb is not about physics, basically. It's not about momentum. You're not pushing something. You stand in its path so that it will collide with you, and then it will go in the direction that you have specified. So if your character is facing to the west and the orb is coming from north to south, you just stand in its way, face the west, it hits you, and then immediately goes west. You're not having to get behind and push. Meaning, as long as you're able to set up very specific routes, it's very easy for your players to just knock it into the right direction where it needs to go. If you don't touch the Void Orb, it instantly charges Ashara as quickly as possible. If it touches Ashara, or any of the obelisks, it will detonate and it will explode. On Mythic difficulty, however, if it touches any of those players, I believe it touches any player whatsoever, it will spawn the Awakened Terrors. Now, at this point, it looks like it's pretty much inevitable that you're going to spawn these Awakened Terrors. We tried to find some fancy strats to weave the Void Orbs through these very narrow gaps of the obelisks, and it really didn't work that well at all. So we were looking at a minimum of 2 or 3 bounces that were going to come out for the group. Usually 2, but if you needed to make some corrections, you might need a 3rd bounce to come in to help. And the big thing with the Awakened Terror is they will have the Terror Wave, which is just a long cast time, AoE nuke, AoE fear that goes out onto the group. We tried and we experimented with having the boss getting dragged to whichever location that the adds spawned from. That becomes a ton of movement for the raid, especially when you're having to dodge any of the pizza slice effects that are coming out. But if you're just running with a heavy enough range stack, or your melee are mobile enough to make it work, didn't really seem like it was going to be that harmful, especially since it was one of the 4th bosses. But the big problem I have with this encounter in particular is that there's just such little damage, and it's a straight up pass-fail boss fight. If the orb touches the obelisks, Ashara, or the walls, it instantly detonates, everyone's dead. And once again, with a mythic mechanic coming in, once you interact with the Void Woken debuff, once you start moving any of the orbs around, you can no longer do it the rest of the encounter. So, if you want to get your guild really prepared for this encounter, you should probably go and do it on Heroic, and then make sure you cycle through everybody doing the mechanic, aiming it in the right direction, and getting the job done. Because this boss can be a wall if guilds are just not doing soccer tryouts properly. The best thing that you can do for yourself, if you're worried that you might have some potatoes, make sure that you have probably 4 rotations, maybe 5 rotations of players, groups of 3. So you have up to 15 players. You can leave the worst 5 potatoes out to interact with the Void Orb, get used to moving it around, and get used to the mechanics and, I guess, physics of it. From that perspective, though, there's not much ticking damage that goes out in the fight. It starts to ramp up near the end. But from that perspective, it seems like it could be 2 healed pretty much based off of our testing, right? You might need to like bring some classes, for example, or if you brought classes that brought a lot of like side utility or something like that. Darknesses are pretty helpful, especially because it's a lot of ticking damage. But through and through, there just really wasn't that much impact on it. And it was pretty disappointing that, especially if you shut down every single Terror Wave, which was not difficult to do either, you really didn't have that much of a challenge as a healer, except for just raw mechanics. So, 4th boss into the raid, it was okay. I think the main allure is that you just get to play soccer with a boss, and that's about it. Now, those are the first 4 bosses of the Ny'alotha raid. Let me know what you guys think of these. What do you think is good, bad, the other? If you have any questions on any of the mechanics that are going on that I didn't cover just yet. These are just meant to be quick previews, some of my initial thoughts on the encounters, and how we're going to be facing up against them, and some speculation from a healer point of view. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and much love to all the subscribers on Twitch who help make this possible. Be sure to check out the Twitch stream as well. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I'll catch you on it next time.